Welcome back to the School of Muscle podcast. Today I have on Dr. Jonathon Weakley, and he joins me to discuss, the primary discussion is going to be a paper that is titled Physiological Responses and Adaptations to Lower Load Resistance Training, Implications for Health and Performance, but I'm sure we'll go on little tangents here and there and discuss some other stuff. So first off, thank you for joining me today, Dr. Weakley.
Oh man, it's good to be here, my brother. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, you betcha. So I think a good place for us to kind of start here, and you can kind of take this wherever you'd like, is what kind of led you to wanting to write this paper in the first place?
Yeah, it's a good question, mate. And I think there was two things. So I have a very strong bodybuilding background, and coming from that kind of physique bodybuilding kind of interests, I always saw the value in using a range of loads. And, bodybuilders historically have always used a range of loads. And, while you could always say that's anecdotal evidence, it's, centuries of people focusing on their physique using a range of loads can't be wrong. After a while, that evidence just accrues over time. So I've always seen value in low loads and heavy loads. But on top of that, we've had such a bias towards heavy loads all the time that someone needs to kind of right the ship a little bit, kind of get those balance in the weights a little bit more and say, hey, low loads can also be feasible. And, low loads also help improve accessibility to resistance training. Resistance training has always been the domain of kind of us muscle heads and guys who just want to slam weights and, be bigger, stronger, more powerful. And the thing is that low loads are actually a gateway into being bigger, faster, stronger, and improving longevity as well. So it was just a bit of a perfect storm of everything, and the evidence is really overwhelming. Low loads work.
Awesome. Well, I think that kind of sets up why you wanted to do this, and we'll also kind of touch on specifically the point of, the kind of stereotypical thought process was you have to lift heavy to get big. So we'll definitely touch on that. But maybe just before we get to that, I think one question that someone might have is what was different about like this review article that you wrote compared to maybe like a classic, I don't know if that's the correct term, but maybe a classic study to where you recruit participants and have methods and kind of take them through that. What's kind of the main difference between something like you did here versus something like that?
Yeah, so we have a hierarchy of evidence and research and sports science in general, or just science in general, and we often have anecdotal evidence right down the bottom. And I'm sure I'm going to get plastered with a few of those anecdotal comments in the in your comments, mate. But and every time we publish a paper, you kind of see those anecdotal evidence. Well, my next door neighbor does that, and he's massive. It's like, sweet, bro. But then we have on top of that, we also often have studies where you recruit people and you do randomized control studies like that, and then you kind of got reviews at the top. And now things like systematic reviews and meta-analyses are very, very strong forms of evidence. But this was a narrative review and helps kind of tells a story. It's a narrative, and it helps bring together all the evidence, and you can kind of give the key points in a balanced way. So this is a review article which covers the entire area of low load resistance training and how it can be beneficial for people who are fit, healthy, getting bigger, faster, stronger, but also people who just want to improve their livelihood, just improve their longevity, their health, and all those sorts of things. So it's a combination of all the literature. It's not just one study, because when you write one study, it's just you can only be talking about that one topic, where we can talk about everything.
Perfect. Well, I think that sets things up well. And now to kind of dive into a few things that I found very interesting when kind of reading this article. And one of those is what I just alluded to a second ago. And that was how there used to be kind of this idea that, you have to lift heavy to get big. And you kind of touch on this specifically in your article. So is this true? Do you need to lift heavy to get big? Or what is maybe kind of the more evidence-based approach to that saying?
Yeah, no, definitely. Hey, so like first and foremost, you look at like athletes who are genuinely wanting to get better, and like, let's say, we're talking about getting bigger. The question was getting bigger. So let's talk about those gym goers who want to improve their physique and body composition and things like that. Now, at no point throughout history have I ever worked with bodybuilders and they've turned around and go, I must lift heavy all the time. they've often done things like drop sets, burnout sets. They've used light weights to failure with 25, 30 reps. There's social media clips where Ronnie Coleman's, squatting 800 pounds and things like that, and don't get me wrong, no one's ever arguing that those things aren't beneficial, but physique competitors have always used low loads. So for me, it's never been one or the other. You can use both, and it is definitely true that you can use low loads to improve body composition. And if you don't believe it, go do it yourself. And the thing is that we know that it can also improve strength. It mightn't optimally develop like specific strength in a specific exercise because a specific exercise has a skill component. But if you utilize low loads and take it to failure, then you can develop strength because you're absolutely recruiting the entire muscle. If you're absolutely recruiting the muscle, then you cause mechanical tension on that muscle, and then you cause adaptations in that muscle. So you can get bigger, faster, stronger for sure with low loads. It's just that there's somewhere in the line, and I don't quite know where, it might have been with the age of social media, that people have just gone, you gotta lift heavy. You gotta lift heavy. It's just a tool and tool belt though, isn't it? Like different loads.
Absolutely. And I think that maybe some of it comes down to, what people mean by when they say you got to lift heavy. Like use the example of Ronnie Coleman, in which, like, yes, he was lifting heavy, but he was also like doing 4 plates for sets of 10.
Yeah,
so it's like he wasn't necessarily just like doing triples and, these what's classically like these more strength rep ranges. Like he was lifting heavy, but he was doing them for reps. So I think that there's like a distinction there to, it's great to lift heavy, but there might be like, a various range of rep ranges, not necessarily like lifting heavy with triples and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. And like Ronnie Coleman never just lifted triples. I've like go Google him, go YouTube him and all those sorts of things. You see really large sets. Go look at lifters all throughout the ages, and they do sets of 20 and things like that, like Mensa and all those sorts of guys. Like I've worked out with Darren Onakawa. He's my first cousin. He came to Mr. Olympia, he competed, did well, all those sorts of things, professional bodybuilder. And at no point was he like, bro, 2 to 3 reps, that's it. Like, no one's that naive. And this is where it probably gets like in my head a little bit, that probably bodybuilders are like, nah, you gotta lift heavy, because no one was ever that naive to think that to begin with. It's just this, maybe the social media stigma of, hey, I gotta lift heavy all the time. I'm seeing Big Ron lifting that sort of stuff, therefore I have to lift that sort of stuff. But it's relative. Like heavy and light are relative terms, and what's heavy for you might feel light for me, or vice versa.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that your point on social media is really good as well, because people are going to post like, the impressive heavy triple that they did.
Yeah.
And maybe that is just like one set within their entire program they did, in which maybe they're doing a ton of other sets of 10, sets of 15, drop sets, stuff like that. So I think that social mediaification of kind of bodybuilding might lead people to think you just need to do these heavy singles and triples and stuff like that all the time.
And so you've never seen someone put on, like, I don't have TikTok because I'm not young enough. But the thing is that, but like to put on like Instagram or TikTok or one of those social media platforms, a prolonged set of 30 reps to failure. Because you'd lose the entire viewership within the first few seconds, and the algorithm will know that. And the thing is that you'll then, no one's really impressed by doing bicep curls with 9 kilograms to absolute failure. But that's why things like blood flow restriction work as well. You know what I mean? It's just, like if you just look at the science objectively and just what like people historically have done, it's always been implemented.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that one other kind of part of this paper that I thought was super interesting was maybe some of the physiological differences between the adaptations that might occur when you lift with like quite heavy loads. And like when I say quite heavy loads, like you mentioned, it's relative, but when I'm saying that, I'm meaning like higher percentages of someone's 1 rep max or something like that, and the different physiological adaptations to kind of more lighter loads. So maybe we could get into what are maybe some of the different kind of physiological adaptations that might occur when someone is kind of lifting heavy versus lifting with lighter loads.
Yeah, okay. So there's kind of layers, like you can always kind of keep on going in deeper and deeper and deeper. Now, I'll be honest, it's extremely difficult to ascertain some of the cellular signaling differences. And there are differences when you do heavy loads. And I probably should have started with this. Heavy often refers to 70% and above or 75% and above. It doesn't really matter once you get that high because it's heavy. And then you got lighter loads, which is kind of like 50% and below. When we've looked at the literature, we can see that there are some cellular signaling differences. However, when you look at that sort of data, my eyes kind of just glaze over and you just kind of go, oh, great, what does it all mean, right? Because you look at the time point and you go, oh, AKT signaling or mTOR signaling or, some change in Parkin or something has increased. And you go, but how does that affect me? Because guys go into gym, they just want bigger muscles. They're not fussed about mTOR, phosphorylation or whatever. So the thing is that despite them being essential for long-term physical adaptations, we need to take some of those protein, those signaling responses, cellular signaling responses with a pinch of salt. However, if I was to then kind of take a step out, we do see some changes with differences between heavy and light loads with mitochondrial protein responses. And it's feasible that due to the greater volumes that are being completed with lighter loads, because if you do, let's say, 40% of your 1RM until absolute failure, or 4 reps of 90%, you're going to do more total tonnage with the lower reps. And if you do the lower with the lower loads, the higher reps, and if you do those lighter loads to failure, you're going to do more volume, and the evidence does suggest that you have prolonged myofibrillar responses and changes in protein, in cytoplasmic protein responses at 24 hours and even up to 72 hours. So you may have a prolonged protein synthesis response. So these findings kind of indicate that when resistance training with light loads is taken to failure, we may be able to induce substantial protein responses across the entire muscle, not just some sections of the muscle. And then we might also lead to greater oxidative capacity of the muscle. And that kind of makes sense, like more of an endurance muscle. But if you're still recruiting type 2 fibers and you're still recruiting the entire muscle, it's just that you might also have greater protein synthesis responses in the mitochondrial-based proteins as well. So there are differences. You've got to take them with a bit of a pinch of salt, but it does show that you can induce substantial improvements in the overall muscle.
Absolutely. And I thought, not necessarily that there was a bunch of practical takeaways necessarily from some of these different physiological responses, but more so it was interesting to me that there are differences,
yes,
which might propose if there are differences and you want to hedge your bets a little bit, then maybe working in a broader spectrum of rep ranges makes sense to maybe take advantage of some of those differences that are occurring. Does that sound fair?
Oh, mate, why wouldn't you? Again, it's a tool in your tool belt. And, there's no need to hammer a screw or it's not the right tool at that time. So if there's a slightly different response, maybe that might be great. Okay, cool. But alternatively, you might just say that I can't tolerate higher loads in this exercise. So an example, a very practical example, someone like me who's been lifting for 20 years now, and quite seriously lifting, consistently lifting for 20 years. The thing is that I struggle to squat now. My lower back's just going to explode if I do those really heavy, high volume sets. But I know for a fact that I can, slap some, wraps on and, blood flow occlusion wraps. And then I can do sets to 20 to 30. Now it's going to hurt, but I'm not afraid of pain. I actually quite embrace the pain. Something something dark within us all, right? But the thing is that I don't mind the pain of lifting. What I don't like is injuries and niggles that stop me from lifting for the next 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks. So the thing is that if I can use that training to have similar adaptations, maybe even even superior adaptations, then why wouldn't you?
And I think that is working around injuries or pains and stuff like that. That is one area to where using higher rep range training, so lower loads, is definitely effective there. And I know that with some of my clients that are, I have clients that are in their 60s and they're lifting, and for them, hey, we're probably not going to do like sets of 3 on a back squat. But could we do like a goblet squat where they do sets of 20 or 25? Absolutely. And that tends to work quite well. So I think that it's really good kind of in this situation. And that kind of leads me to, are there other scenarios like we kind of covered working around injuries or niggles and stuff like that? Are there other scenarios where you think kind of doing this higher rep training is particularly a good tool for kind of that scenario?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm going to preface this that if you want to optimize the outcomes from low load training, you do need to take the training to what we call concentric failure or volitional failure, where you're like, I can't do any more. You might be able to physically do one or two more, but yeah, you can also take it to you use reps in reserve, so use one or two in reserve. But the thing is it gets really, really hard to subjectively say, yes, I can do one or two more in reserve with 40% of your 1RM, because you always surprise yourself. Now, naturally, and I think first and foremost, we also need to identify that no one's ever saying, oh, just lift light loads. No one's ever said that. You lift heavy loads, great. And if you're trying to get strong for a powerlifting meet or whatever it might be, then you do need to lift in the exercise that you're competing in, because back squats, bench presses, deadlifts, they're a skill. You've got to express a lot of force, but there's a skill component of it. So therefore, great, load those exercises up. But if you're going, hey, I can't tolerate those high loads on my joints for whatever reason, then you might chuck those low loads at the end of the training session. And you look even at bodybuilding historically, drop sets. They historically have used low loads, and they often take them to failure. Take it to failure or 1-2 repetitions away from failure, strip a bit of weight off, go again. And that is like literally low load training, isn't it? It's high repetitions, lighter loads, going close to failure, and you optimize or maximize the adaptations that you can get. However, I'll also say this, that there's a difference between optimal and great. You know what I mean? So we can still have clients. This might be more appropriate for less active individuals or older individuals who might just go, hey, I just want to start resistance training. And hey, we don't need to beat them silly. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we'll get to that later when we really want to start slapping on the pounds. But the thing is that just using lighter loads, building a bit of confidence in the exercises, building some competency in the gym and confidence, I think is really, really important. And I think it would be naive or even negligent if we just said, right, you've been in here for a couple of weeks now, just max it, 85% and above. They'd just be silly. I don't think you'd get any more customers back, and every PT would know that. So I think realistically, there's so many different ways to incorporate it. It's just the world's your oyster, and it's a tool in the tool belt.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. And I know that one question that kind of comes up, and one maybe proposition of these lower loads that you see across the internet is that if you want to grow your slower twitch fibers, you should use lower loads. But if you want to grow your fast twitch fibers, you should use heavier loads. And some people have even taken that to the point of, this is why you should lift heavy, because it's going to grow your fast twitch fibers, and those have a greater capacity for growth. Could you maybe kind of touch on what you think about that?
Now, first and foremost, if anyone's ever like 100% certain on something, just like run in the opposite direction. They don't have the nuance or proper understanding to comprehend what the depth of the research. And in my opinion, the research is really quite equivocal, on whether there's preferential hypertrophy of type 1 or type 2 research. People like Brad Schoenfeld, someone I am exceedingly fortunate to call a colleague now, and he's been a great person to work with. He's really interested in this, from what I can tell in his own research. And it's feasible that those higher volumes and lighter loads can cause maybe preferential type 1 hypertrophy. And we know that when you take lower loads to absolute failure, we see decreases in glycogen content of the slow muscle fibers, which suggests that, hey, they are being used. But there's a difference between using them and then growing them. And on top of that, one of the mechanisms which we know that low load resistance training works is that, okay, on a very, very simple kind of like superficial a way to approach this is you pick up a light load and you exercise, and it feels light at first, and then you're halfway through and you go, oh, this is moderate, and then by the end of it you're kind of just like absolutely in agony. But what's happening is those lighter muscle fibers which were being used initially have kind of died out, and they're having to recruit those big type 2 fibers, and that's why we start to see strength adaptations and hypertrophic adaptations in the muscle, because we're actually having to recruit the entire muscle. So whether we actually see preferential adaptations in type 1 or slow twitch fibers is in a way moot, because we're actually recruiting those big type 2 fibers by the end of it anyway. And there might be, as I said, there might be some mitochondrial benefits or oxidative capacity benefits, but you're going to recruit those big type 2 fibers as well. There might be a drag away from the purely type 2X fibers to type 2A, but that happens with the resistance training anyway. It's fair, and I understand where it's coming from, but the evidence is quite clear that you get just as strong, you can produce just as much force. It's just that there's a skill component. And by the way, do it with things like isolation exercises, because doing back squats with 40 reps, they call them widowmakers for a reason, right?
Yeah. You might not be able to stand up for several days following that. I know there was a time where it was like a German volume training program. I'm not sure if you've heard about it. It's like a 10 by 10 on the big lifts. And this idiot college student thought that would be a great idea, and I couldn't walk for I don't know, maybe 2 weeks. It was so bad.
Totally. When I was really serious about bodybuilding, and I was the biggest of the bros. I was leading the bros. And the thing is that I'd take my own bucket in there, so I could throw up for GVT and things like that. And I was to the book, kind of minute breaks and all those sorts of things. But to digress on this sort of stuff, why 10 reps? Why 10 sets? Why not 11 reps? Why not? Have you ever programmed a client 9 reps and they just lose their flippin' mind? It's pretty interesting, And we've just got this fascination with round numbers and strength and conditioning. And this is where things like VBT, RPE, reps in reserve are so valuable, because they get us away from just the sets and reps. We're thinking about the stimulus, and that's absolutely essential. We need to be thinking about what stimulates the muscle so we can optimize the muscle adaptation. And that's where we really need to start focusing, because 10 times 10, what is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like your point on kind of getting away from the specific sets and reps a lot, because I know I've had clients that are like, okay, when I'm doing a set, if I program 6 to 10 reps and they get to 10 reps, they'll ask me, should I just stop? And then I'll ask them, what do you think your reps in reserve were? How close to failure? And I really try to get them to prioritize, okay, since we know that, assuming we're training close to failure and we're training with 8+ reps, it's going to be effective at stimulating hypertrophy. So really prioritize that training closer to failure portion, regardless of where your reps fall, and then adjust your weight accordingly to get a little bit closer to that rep range. But it doesn't have to be this exact number there.
Absolutely, mate. And I think you've really nailed it. It's the proximity to failure. And I think people often get so infatuated with the number of reps that I'm doing. But there's so much differences, and we need to embrace these differences across humankind in general. You might be someone who has poor muscular endurance, and that's okay, but you're still training close to failure, and you're still optimizing that hypertrophy. And on top of that, we see those NSCA textbooks which say, with 75% you can do 10 reps, and it's so absolute. But in sports science, nothing is absolute, nothing. And look at the continuums. We're going, 10 to 12 reps, that's where you get hypertrophy. But it's not true. It's fundamental. Look at a weightlifter. Olympic weightlifter, they get great hypertrophy. And we really need to be thinking about the physiological stimulus on the individuals. And with those tables that are being that we use for prescription, there's over 300% variance in that. So someone might be able to go do 6 reps with 75%, but someone might be able to do 18 reps. So if you prescribe 10, you've got people who will be absolutely just so far beyond failure, 2/3 beyond failure. I mean, you've got someone else who's only, 40% of the way to failure. So we need to start thinking about the physiological stimulus rather than say, hey, I did 10 times 10 or 5 times 5, because that's the definition of just blinkers on. Oh, this is what my mate said,
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you think about some athletic sports like gymnastics or something like that, in which they might not even do a lot of specific like bodybuilding training for their sport. But if you see gymnasts that have a ton of like time under tension, like doing push-ups on rings and different things like that, all of them almost always have huge upper bodies. So like that stimulus component is there, but they're not really worried about doing a specific number of reps or sets or stuff like that. So I think that is a super important consideration.
Absolutely. And you can look across the entire spectrum from Olympic weightlifters who often do like low volume clusters. So clusters of 1 rep, break, 1 rep, break, 1 rep. Or or like CrossFitters who are extremely down that kind of like muscular endurance end, and they're just jacked. Look at like CrossFit Games and all those sorts of things. So you look across the entire spectrum, and this is what guys like Brad Schoenfeld is saying. He's saying you can get muscle hypertrophy across the entire range, the entire spectrum. We need to get out of this mindset. And if I can get 3 sets of hypertrophy with 3 sets of 10 or 10 sets of 10, well, that's 30 reps versus 100 reps in total. You know what I mean? So if you kind of start going like, come on, where's, let's get some, far out.
Yeah, absolutely. One question I definitely wanted to make sure to ask you, and because I'll get this from clients sometimes, in which they'll say, they really don't like going above like 15 reps. It just kind of feels uncomfortable and painful for them. And they also don't really like going below about 7 or 8 reps. It just kind of doesn't feel right for them. They can't really focus on the mind muscle connection as much and different things like that. So they tend to like to have everything in that 8 to kind of 15 rep range. Now, if we're thinking about like just on paper, what might be the most optimal for muscle growth, do you think that there would still be additive benefits for this individual to still doing some work in that maybe 15 to 30 rep range and maybe even in that like 4 to 8 rep range? Or do you think that they could pretty much effectively maximize their muscle growth doing all their work in that 8 to 15 rep range?
Man, it's a good question. And there has been some research on this, again, at Brad Schoenfeld's lab, and it's, I think if they're doing sufficient volume in that rep range that they're doing, then that sufficient volume is by definition sufficient. However, do you need to then remove some volume from that 8 to 15 range and then chuck some up the top and then chuck some down the bottom? I think it's I don't think it's really necessary. I think realistically they'll be fine with what they were doing because it was sufficient. May there be some added benefits to like certain lift strength, and that might then long-term potentiate greater muscular endurance at those lighter weights? Absolutely, for sure. That's why you need to get stronger so you can lift progressively heavier loads in those ranges and all those sorts of things. For sure, that might be beneficial, and that's why we often periodize training and taper up or taper down loads and volumes. But is it mandatory that we then say, hey guys, if we want to optimize optimize our muscle hypertrophy, we need to put more volume in the 35 rep range? I don't think necessarily. I think could you benefit from it? Yeah, for sure. Things like drop sets. My whole PhD was based around supersets and trisets, about how we can get more volume into periods of time. So like if anyone loves doing like high volume training and all those sorts of things, that's me. That's a bodybuilder through and through. But the thing is that is it necessary? I don't think so. I think you'll still get sufficient gains and probably juice, maximize the juice from that squeeze if you are indeed doing good volume in that 8 to 15 range. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And I think my kind of stance to that question, and I agree that it's like a tricky question. Like I can't give a straight black and white answer, but if it were me, if I were going to guess, I would say, if over the course of 4 years, you just did sufficient volume in that 8 to 15 rep range and you really didn't deviate from that, would I expect much different results compared to doing just a little bit of that volume in higher rep ranges and a little bit in lower? I would be surprised if there was like huge differences in that. Yeah. So kind of based on that thought process, I kind of don't like force that issue a whole lot. And I think there's other ways to kind of program that to kind of get around it. So maybe we incorporate some drop sets and stuff like that. So we're still increasing like the metabolic buildup of that set and maybe still getting some of those benefits of maybe lower loads might get you, but we're kind of still staying in a little bit lower of a rep range because we're kind of decreasing that rest time and stuff like that. So there might be different ways to kind of get at some of those adaptations that you might benefit from with those lower loads.
Absolutely. And I think if you were to only program people with 12 reps, you'll lose that client. You know what I mean? It's facts. Like people get bored and like, look at, the work of, McGuigan et al. And all those guys around strain and monotony and all those sorts of things. Kyle Foster's work. And, if you only programmed within one range, the individual will get bored, leave, get injured. They just zone out. They're not happy. So the thing is there benefits of having higher or lighter loads? Yeah, for sure. And I don't know about you, mate, but for me, some days the idea of doing really heavy back squats and deadlifts and things like that is just untenable. Like all right, cool. Like I'll do 30, I'll do 35. I'll put myself in the hurt locker like that. But the idea of doing a heavy deadlift and blowing my back out is just not for me today, man. So I know I need to get that muscle stimulus. Therefore, I'm going to pump it up, do a few more reps, and still get that hypertrophic adaptation.
Yep, perfect. And maybe as just a final kind of summary here, are there any kind of core takeaways that you think someone should keep in mind when considering these different rep ranges and, any kind of practical takeaways to consider when thinking about someone's kind of rep range and the loads they use when it comes to growing as much muscle as possible?
Yeah, sure. So I think, first of all, it's never one or the other. We need to get out of this mindset that in sport science, exercise training, whatever, it's, black and white. There's always gray in the conversation. So you can still do heavy loads and you can do light loads, or vice versa. If you are just doing one or the other, you will not be optimizing your gains, I don't believe. I think it's good to be changing across the spectrum at times, but you might have blocks where you focus on specific adaptations or specific rep ranges to induce a different adaptation. I think if you are going to implement low loads, it would be wise to do it at the end. Pre-fatiguing methods, and trust me, if bodybuilders love that sort of stuff, but the evidence isn't actually that supportive of it because you maximally recruit muscle fibers with heavy loads anyway. So pre-fatiguing it with a light load first doesn't really make sense, and it just probably leads to a lot of hurt. And I think, and you lifting lighter loads later on because you're tired anyway. So I think putting those light loads at the end of the resistance training session. So, if you do your heavy back squats first, cool, great job. Then you might want to take it to the leg extension towards the end and just hammer those. I think it would be wise to limit it on certain muscle areas, 2-3 times a week, because when you do substantial volume, you cause substantial fatigue, and often that takes time to recover from that. So, 2-3 times might be sufficient. And I think you do it on your isolation exercises, as I was kind of alluding to before. Doing it on heavy squats, heavy deadlifts, on deadlifts and squats, just puts you on in a pretty bad place. I think it's a lot easier to focus on, like a bicep curl or a preacher curl, leg extension, hamstring curl, whatever it might be, and then just really focus on those groups that you need to focus on. And I think that would probably be the easiest way. And of course, it's never one or the other. It's never black or white. And if you're ever on a YouTube or a Reddit forum and you just find yourself in an argument with these people, on Twitter, whatever it is, that you've misunderstood. So there's nuance to every conversation.
Yep, perfect. Well, I think those are some really good practical takeaways. I would definitely agree with the isolation movements as, trying to do it on compounds. Not only is it like almost just masochistic and just brutal, but also I think a huge limiting factor there is like your cardiovascular system. Like trying to do a set of 30 odd squats, it's like I'm going to be winded far before my muscles get fatigued. Yeah. So it just kind of prevents things there. So I think this was an awesome episode here, Dr. Weakley. If people want to kind of stay up to date on the research you're doing, anything else you're putting out? Is there anywhere that they can kind of go to follow you?
Yeah, for sure. So Twitter is probably easiest in some ways. It's Jonathon Weakley, and drop the Y and put a 1 at the end of my Twitter handle. Then you got on Instagram, Jonathon_Weakley_PhD. And you can always email me. I'm far more accessible than people think I am. We're busy, but the thing is that if there's a genuine question or ability to connect with someone, we've always got time. So the thing is just reach out, and mate, it's been a pleasure to just kind of like bro out and talk about muscle hypertrophy with you, brother.
Awesome. Yep, I totally agree. It's been great and really appreciate this. I love when scientists, I could tell, are also bros at heart, and you're definitely one of them. So that's awesome.
Yeah, man. There's a few bros over in New Zealand, man. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for coming out today.
Thanks, brother.